You're listening to The Abundance Agenda, a podcast about growth and progress. I'm James O'Malley.
And I'm Martin Robbins.
This week, how a new database is going to make everything about driving less annoying. And we talked to Ben Gascoigne about the Built Environment Select Committee's inquiry into new towns. But first, Martin is going to take us on a bridge to nowhere. So, Martin, you've done loads of original reporting in the last few weeks, and you've uncovered some, frankly, extraordinary stories about cow experiences and things. And you've got another cracker this week. This, listeners, honest to God, do not press pause. This is really worth listening to because you found this amazing HS2 story that you're going to be posting to your Substack at the same time as this episode goes live. And I think it's fair to say from what you've told me, you've not told me everything because, you've wanted to keep me in suspense, but from what you've told me, this sounds like it's going to rival the Bat Tunnel for sort of insanity, I guess.
Yeah, this is properly mad. And it starts with something that's quite simple by HS2 standards, which is a small road bridge across a railway. So let me set the scene for you, James. Deep in the heart of the Chilterns in rural Buckinghamshire, there's an incredibly complex section of HS2 that sort of alternates between tunnels and viaducts as it burrows through the hills and then spans the valleys in between them. And in the middle of all of this, there's a relatively simple railway cutting. And over that cutting, they're building a road bridge. And this is a remarkable bridge for a number of reasons, but one of them in particular I think will literally make people's heads explode, James. And if anything, I would say that this makes the Bat Tunnel look like a pretty sensible day at the office.
You're really ramping up the hype on this, Martin, so you really need to deliver on this. So tell me about the bridge. Why is this bridge special?
So let's rewind it back a little bit. When the hybrid bill that sort of set out the plan for HS2 passed through Parliament, it effectively gave planning permission for the whole of the HS2 railway line between London and the West Midlands. And along with the line itself, it's all the other bits and pieces of infrastructure, temporary works, road diversions, lorry routes, and all the other stuff around the line that would be required. Now, the line cuts through hundreds of existing roads and footpaths and other bits of infrastructure, right? And so HS2 have to build dozens and dozens of different bridges, underpasses, drainage systems, and so on. And all of these are explicitly set out in the HS2 hybrid bill.
So basically, as a result, HS2, they're legally obliged to reconnect all of these roads and so on. The bill literally says every single thing they've got to glue back together after they finish digging their new railway line.
Yeah, and it really is like itemized line by line in this absolutely massive bill. So one of the places listed is an innocuous little country lane. It's called Bowood Lane. And for listeners who are following along with their own copy of the HS2 bill, you can find it on page 51, which is surprisingly early, given that this is something that you need like trucks and vehicles to move around. And the bill basically says they have to do a realignment on Bowood Lane, which is specified very narrowly to literally a metre of precision on the map. And they have to provide a bridge over the railway line at that point.
So that sounds pretty sensible, I guess. So what's so special about the bridge?
So partly it's special just because it's an HS2 road bridge, and basically these are like the Marks and Spencer of road bridges. So, whereas a normal bridge over a railway line, for example, would be built to last for 75 years, HS2 bridges, as for the whole project, have to be built to last 120 years. So they're built to a higher standard. They also need to be able to survive impacts from a massive train doing potentially 300 kilometers per hour without completely disintegrating. And because it's a road bridge, it needs to be able to carry 2 lanes of traffic so stuff can pass. And it needs heavy, juicy structures to stop vehicles from, crashing and accidentally falling onto the track below. So you have, if you drive onto the bridge, the walls on either side are basically 6 foot tall reinforced concrete. This bridge is 70 meters long as well. There's systems in place at either end of the bridge to stop cars from going off down the sides and kind of restraining them. And so we're talking about a pretty beefy 70-meter long concrete structure. This would not look out of place on Normandy during D-Day, full of Nazis shooting back at you. Although HS2, I have to say, are keen to stress that no Nazis were involved in the building or staffing of this bridge.
It's always worth checking these days, Martin, given the current political climate.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've got this massive concrete bridge, I guess, in the middle of the Chilterns. And am I right in thinking, is this near Wendover? We talked on the show a while back now, in probably our most notable episode so far, all about Dobbins Lane, where there was the council kicking off against building there. So I'm guessing the council weren't too thrilled about this bridge either?
Yeah, so to sort of give the architects of the bridge a bit of credit, I'm not going to say it blends into the landscape because, if I'm honest, that's a stretch. But given what it is, the thought that's gone into it, the colour of the concrete that they've used and the sort of finishing quality and the way they've kind of set the bridge down a bit into the cutting means that it's much less obtrusive than you would think. It's also in literally the middle of nowhere. So other than a couple of farmers or the occasional rambler, it's not going to be seen by lots of people. But the council, I think it's fair to say, were not thrilled. And this, James, is where we need to talk about hollowways.
Okay, so is this some sort of, I don't know, weird rural thing that you countryside people do? Is this, I don't know, do you shoot foxes there or something?
Almost, James. So you see hollowways a lot in Sussex, like where my parents lived, and in the Chilterns as well. Not so much, it has to be said, in the London suburbs. But essentially, they're ancient sort of single-lane roads that have kind of sunk down into the ground over the centuries. So if you're driving along this in a car, you look on either side and you've got earth piled up on either side and trees above you and vegetation and so on. So you're sort of almost going through like a kind of open tunnel, effectively. It's the kind of place that Google Maps sends you if you're having a really bad day in the car.
It sounds like it'd be quite good for Instagram, though. I mean, more so than like the M3 or something.
Oh, yeah, definitely photogenic, if not particularly drivable. Now, Bowood Lane, it turns out, is a hollowway. And so the council, very reasonably, James, wanted to know if HS2 could possibly make this 70-metre long, 2-lane concrete road bridge better resemble a narrow rural hollowway to sort of blend it into the surrounding landscape.
Did they get like wetter in like Peter Jackson to try and sculpt or model something? How? And anyway, haven't HS2 already got planning permission for the bridge at this point?
So they have, but the hybrid bill gives councils powers to basically argue about a lot of the design details. Now, in theory, this was supposed to be like an expedited fast-track process with the DFT, Department of Transport, acting as kind of a referee and able to step in if things got out of hand. And for some of the route, that worked reasonably well, similarly to something like Crossrail. But certain councils decided to go basically full militant, and one of those was Buckinghamshire. Now, we could, and we probably will someday, do a whole episode on the legal warfare that's taken place between Buckinghamshire County Council and HS2. A lot of the problems here come from the fact that Buckinghamshire is a Conservative-run council for much of recent history. Obviously, the government, particularly in the last 10 years, didn't necessarily want to step in and overhaul local politics. And so there's a lot of kind of reluctance, I think, of people to kind of take charge of the situation and actually cut through this stuff and kind of make it happen. But essentially, they spent a very large number of months going back and forth over the detailed design of the bridge. And to be clear here, most of the design decisions for the bridge are led by engineering and safety. So there's only a very small amount of latitude that you have in building this bridge. It has to have the reinforcement around it. It has to have the 6-foot tall concrete walls on either side to stop cars falling off. Like, there's only so much that you can do about it. And it has to be, crucially, a 2-lane bridge. That's the sort of standard that you have to build these road bridges to. But the council insisted that because the hollowway is 1 lane, the bridge should be 1 lane as well. Now, the bridge was already built and was already 2 lanes, so the compromise that they reached was basically the road would still be 2 lanes, but they would paint a single lane down the middle of it, leaving like a massive gap on either side of the white lines between this sort of single lane and then like the curb 3 feet away.
So the plan was to go to the expense of building the massive bridge and then make it less useful deliberately.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea is if cars need to get past, they can just sort of drive over the lines. But the idea is it sort of, I don't know, gives cars the impression, the fiction that it's single lane, and therefore maybe they'll drive slower, which I can't really see happening. And you can see images of this that I've put on the Substack post, and it looks exactly as mad as it sounds. Actually madder, because what the council also wanted to disguise this bridge and make it look more rural was to put 7-foot grass verges on either side of that single lane. So you would basically have this massive concrete bridge. you'd have like this single lane down the middle. You'd have your 6-foot concrete walls on either side, but you would disguise them with a small piece of turf in front, which again is ridiculous.
And nobody pointed out that this was mental.
No, people tried, I think, but no. Well, I mean, eventually they did. So this eventually goes to the Department for Transport for appeal. The council fail in this appeal, and the planning inspector gives one of those. It's one of those reports, like official reports, where even though it's in very formal language, you can kind of read a lot of subtext between the lines. At one point, he writes, providing 2 wide verges planted with grass with a 3.5 meter wide carriageway between them, in my view, would not mimic a sense of being within a hedge-lined holloway. And then he points out, quite rightly, that the entire point of holloways is they don't have any kind of verge. There's just walls on either side. And he goes on to write, and I'm paraphrasing very, very slightly, that essentially the idea that you can disguise a 70-meter long concrete bridge with a couple of strips of grass is completely fucking mad.
This is tough, sad, Martin. So the council, they were overruled. So just to confirm, the bridge has been built now, right? It physically exists in the world. It's a thing that listeners can spend the weekend and go and have a look at. So even if it looks a bit silly, everything is fine. We have a bridge.
Yeah, it's a great bridge. It's fine. It's in use at the moment. Periodically, you can walk across it, cycle across it, drive across it if you really want to. It's capable of safely carrying 2 lanes of traffic, even though only one of those lanes is painted. It has a beautiful grass verge on either side of it, much smaller than the council wanted. And it's kind of permanently in the shadow of the concrete walls. So I imagine the grass will all die and be overtaken by weeds in the next few months. And that will look absolutely lovely. And it's an incredibly impressive bridge. Like the engineering to build it, like everything on HS2 is stunning. Like they've driven concrete piles deep into the ground and then kind of excavated out the earth underneath the bridge to form this massive cutting that HS2 will speed through at 300 kilometers an hour. The concrete is of the highest standard of quality and finishing. So when you're there on a bright day, and I took some photographs of this, it almost seems to kind of blend into the sort of grey autumnal sky behind it. It's probably, I would say, one of the best small rural road bridges genuinely that has ever been built in the UK.
Martin, we've done this podcast for too long. I get a sense there's a but coming here.
There is just one tiny problem with this bridge, James.
Okay, Martin, go on, tell me.
Well, there isn't really a road.
Sorry, say that again.
So, Bowood Lane is technically a public highway. And so, as part of the Act, HS2 were required to build a fully spec'd road bridge for it. And a road bridge is required to meet certain standards. And so that's what they've built, this big 2-lane road bridge. But if you drive up to either end of Bowood Lane, you can see a big blue sign which says, and I shit you not, unsuitable for motor vehicles.
Fuck off.
So
what?
So technically, cars aren't banned. I didn't try to take the Jag up it, even though I was a little bit tempted. If you're feeling adventurous, you could probably drive a 4x4 up there, but probably not if it was like new, or you cared about the paintwork, or you wanted to keep it in one piece. I've posted pictures of this on my Substack. But what you're looking at, it would be a stretch to even call it a farm track, because at least you could drive like a Land Rover up most farm tracks. If you tried that here, you'd be scraping the wings through like hedgerows. Like, as you see from the picture, it literally looks like a footpath. And that's from the west side. From the east side, it's basically a strip of grass. Like, you wouldn't even know that there'd ever been any kind of road there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photo you sent me now, Martin. It looks just like a lovely rural footpath. It looks like where you take the dog for a walk at the weekend or go rambling or something, not somewhere where you drive a car.
Yeah. I mean, you'd be insane to try and drive a car down that. Apparently, one woman actually got sent on a wild detour by Google Maps in her car. She kind of entered the lane at one end and got a certain, part of the way up it, and then realized that there is, as you can see, absolutely no possible way of turning around. So she has to drive all the way up to the HS2 construction site where they're building the bridge, like bits of car falling off along the way, gripping the wheel, absolutely terrified, eventually manages to somehow get her way to the bridge. And all these construction workers and security guards are there. Like this deeply traumatized woman turns up, and they have to figure out how to basically turn the car around. And then she has to go all the way back down it because there's no other way out. And that must have been pretty terrifying.
That's insane, Martin. How would you even get a car up there? I don't even understand. This is mental.
Yeah, I mean, you can see from the picture that there is not room for a car, and you wouldn't unless you were like lost or mad or stuck in some kind of fugue state. But to summarize, James, HS2 had to fight the council for months on end over the specific design of a road bridge that's going to cost millions of pounds of taxpayer money, 70 meters long, fully specs road bridge to reconnect essentially a grass track to a footpath. Because that's what the hybrid bill told them they had to do.
This is absurd, Martin. This should be up there with the Bat Tunnel. So couldn't someone have intervened before this happened? Was no one throughout this whole process of planning and building and constructing a bridge, did anyone ever stop and say, what are we doing here?
So quite a few people, like local people, for example, because even when this sort of occasionally had cars going up, it was barely used. Like there's survey data from the early 2000s I found, which said that something like 20 or 30 cars would use this in total in both directions in the course of a 24-hour period. And that was 25 years ago. And honestly, like, I don't think anything's been up there recently. There's no houses or properties. The lane doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's just a kind of rural shortcut across some fields between a farmhouse and the A413 on the other side. So a lot of local people have said, well, why not just turn this into a bridleway or a cycle path or a footpath? You could create a lovely public amenity for joggers and cyclists and horse riders and so on. It would be better for the community if you don't have vehicles on it. That, of course, just makes it much safer and more attractive for everybody, kind of reduces traffic and pollution. And more to the point, if you speak to people at HS2, they would say, if we hadn't had to build a road bridge, we could have built a much smaller bridge. We could have provided a footbridge, and that would have been much smaller, more discreet. They could have designed it more attractively in keeping with the sort of style that the council wanted, and would also have been a fraction of the cost. So literally everybody would have been a winner. And all it would have taken really is for the local council at some point to step in and kind of take control of the situation and say, hey, this is a bit absurd. Let's redesignate the road. Let's just say this isn't a road anymore and do the work and turn it into a footpath. But instead, James, they fought to embellish this road bridge with 2 strips of flat grass and a painted lane down the middle.
Martin, I'm fucking furious. That at least the Bat Tunnel technically had a purpose. Whether it works or not, the idea was it was going to protect bats. This is doing literally nothing and is costing millions of pounds. And we wonder why HS2 is so expensive. I feel like I want to join the Taxpayers Alliance or something. What the hell's going on? What is wrong with this country?
It's properly like, I mean, you've built a road bridge where there isn't a road. I don't think there is a better symbol of just the absurdity of this sort of detached, consequence-free, massively legalistic kind of British bureaucracy than this that we can think of. And ultimately, I think this is probably why we're poor.
So, Martin, let's talk about something close to your heart, driving. I know there's nothing more that you enjoy on the weekends than, putting on your driving gloves, taking the Jag out and, I don't know, going wherever you go in the countryside to a fox hunt or like a competition where you grow massive vegetables, something like that.
Well, my favourite thing to do in the car, James, is pick up those big gas canisters for the barbecue that we have outside and drive home from B&Q at 60 miles an hour with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand holding a giant container of gas on the passenger seat, just hoping I don't crash into anything and explode.
If this is how your life ends, Martin, this podcast is going to seem very strange to play back. But I guess as much as you love driving, there must be some things that annoy you about it, right? So I suppose you don't have to travel with the Great Unwashed on a socialist train, but driving's annoying too. I hate driving.
Yeah, I mean, particularly other drivers, people doing 40 miles an hour in a 60, people driving automatic cars who for some reason don't seem to be able to accelerate properly out of roundabouts, and people that just sort of dither along talking on their mobile. I mean, really just other people, James. Other people really annoy me, and if they would just get off the road, it would just be a much better time for everyone, but specifically for me.
I have got a grand theory that driving makes us worse people because it tries to convince us all that we're all like the main character in our lives because you're in control of the vehicle, which just makes everyone else more annoying because they're like NPCs. Whereas something like a public transport, like a train, we're all in it together. We're all suffering together, or we're all sharing this journey. But anyway, Martin, the reason I wanted to talk about driving is because this week I want to tell you about something I think is genuinely amazing that the Department for Transport is doing. And weirdly, they're not really shouting about it. They're not telling anyone. And I think this could solve, well, I was going to say all problems with driving, everything annoying about driving, but maybe not all of the problems you've just described. But I think it could definitely make driving significantly less annoying.
Okay, so I'm curious, is this going to be mandatory retesting every 5 years, James? Because I think that would be a grand idea.
Maybe that's more of a second term commitment for the government, Martin. So let's start this off. So let's go back in time. Have you heard of a thing called a Traffic Regulation Order, a TRO?
Not hugely, but I can sort of guess what it is from context clues, but go on.
Okay, so every road in the country, it's all managed by different bits of government. So National Highways, which used to be called the Highways Agency, which had the best logo in all of government because it was like an H and an A, where the H was like a motorway bridge and the A was like a road going under it. Brilliant. But they've rebranded. They've rebranded as But they've rebranded as National Highways. But they do all the strategic roads, things like motorways and the bigger A roads and stuff like that. And then you've got your local councils. They look after the smaller roads, and then there's a few sort of weirder exceptions, like most of the major roads in London, they're looked after by Transport for London, who make sure buses can run down them and so on. Anyway, these authorities, they all look after the roads, and when they want to change something, like they want to adjust a speed limit or create a bus lane or dig up the road to do some roadworks, they have to issue a Traffic Regulation Order, a TRO, and this is the legal document that explains what they're going to do.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing that used to be published in the local paper back when there were local papers. I guess they probably just send them to Ed Jennings now or something, but they're floating around somewhere, right?
Yeah, they're legally obliged to publish them in the local press so people can theoretically find out what's going on. In effect, it's a massive de facto subsidy to the really awful local news outlets, the legacy ones run by Reach POC, and it's just a way of subsidising them. But that's a whole other story. I'll put a link to a big post I wrote moaning about that in the show notes. But anyway, TROs. So you look at them, if you actually look at the documents, they're basically incomprehensible. It's all legalese and sort of hard to decipher descriptions of what's actually going on. Often they don't include things like diagrams, which would be quite useful. So even working out what bit of the road they apply to can be actually quite difficult.
And you would assume that these things would be published online at this point as well?
Yeah, most of them are. So I think if you go to your local council website, it's not a legal obligation, and maybe some of them don't, but I think most of them now do publish their TROs on the internet. TfL publish just a big list on their website buried somewhere. Kent County Council, my local council, they actually have an interactive map that you can click on to see what's going on, but it's shite because you can click on the pin, so you can see roughly the area where the TRO applies to, but then it doesn't actually say, oh, when we're digging up the road here, or there's a bus lane here. It just links you to a PDF of the same sort of incomprehensible traffic order. So it's like very grudging sort of transparency on the local council's part. And actually, the mad thing about Kent County Council is you click on these things and you realise what you're reading isn't just a PDF, but it's someone has like produced this on another computer. They printed it out, handed it to someone else, and then someone else has scanned it back in to upload it to the TRO system online or something like that. So it's absolutely baffling.
So that's great, but how is this going to improve driving?
So here's the thing, right? So TROs, they're not just legal notices. They actually contain some really useful information. So just to walk back a second. So one problem I have with Google Maps is that a lot of the time it just doesn't know about stuff. So the number of times I've been driving along and it didn't realise there were roadworks taking place. Even on major roads, I've been caught out on motorways by like unexpected overnight works. And I say unexpected by me. Like you'd think someone knows about this. So you just turn up to the one junction where you need to turn off and it's all coned off and you're sent on a mystery tour. Once I was driving back from Glasgow, 8 hours into the journey. We got to the last motorway junction to get home, and it was all closed. So there was another sort of 50 miles on the journey. I could have cried, but I was behind the wheel of a car, so I had to keep my shit together. And it happens all the time. So another time, again, I'm an anxious driver, so I'll be looking at Google Maps as I'm driving along, and it will suddenly say, "Oh, the speed limit here is different to what the last sign I remember seeing was," and I suddenly become panicky. I'm like, "Oh shit, am I breaking the speed limit, or am I going too slow, or have I missed something?" And I feel like I'm going crazy. It's because it's all inconsistent. So all this stuff on Google Maps is generally crowdsourced from different places. It's all wildly inconsistent. And there's loads of other missing things as well. Like, again, when I'm planning a trip somewhere, if I'm planning to park on the street, I will literally go on Google Maps before I leave the house and go onto Street View and then find myself paging through, virtually walking along the street I'm going to go to try and see if I can see a traffic sign saying what the parking restrictions are in case it's like residence parking only. It's all just a big old mess.
Yeah, and then you find that the parking sign's been blurred out by the thing that automatically blurs out text, which is really not helpful. But yeah, I mean, this data is incredibly hit and miss, right? So in theory, a lot of this stuff is available. In theory, Google Maps knows about roadworks, but you have Parkopedia and so on for car parking. But it's like people who say, oh, can't cars be automatically limited to whatever the speed limit is in the area that you're driving to? Most of the time, the car doesn't know what the speed limit is. It's either try to read a speed limit sign with a camera on the front of it, which might work or might not work, or it's trying to infer it from data from places like Google. And 9 times out of 10, there's at least 2 different versions of what the speed limit should be. It's very hit and miss, right?
Yeah, and this is what's infuriating, in that TROs, they exist. They're out there in the world. They're theoretically being published. They contain ground truth about important things, about every little thing, about how the road works, about which lanes you can drive on, about where you can park, about how fast you can go. All of these little things. When there's a school street or something like that, when you have to go slower at certain times of day. But all of the mapping services we use tend to be crowdsourced or inconsistent. So there is a really interesting data question of, can we get this data from TROs and make it useful? Can we make it available to Google Maps and mapping services and other apps and other applications so we can actually build more reliable mapping systems and so on?
Yeah, so it seems like a massively good idea, not just for driving around, but also, I guess, like navigation for lorry drivers, or if we have autonomous vehicles in the future. So I'm completely sold. How do we make it happen, James? Is this going to be another one of your postcode address file campaigns?
It is a bit like that, Martin. Actually, lorries is a really interesting one as well. There's a route near me which has been closed off to lorries, but lorries keep driving up there. And if you could have lorry drivers that have a sat-nav which says specifically where you can and can't drive, and it's all legally absolutely bulletproof, that would be so much more useful. But yeah, so this brings me back to what the Department for Transport are doing. So since 2018, there's been a team of poor, beleaguered civil servants there trying to work on what they're calling digital traffic regulation orders, digital TROs. And they've basically been trying to build out a system and wrangle all of the TROs into one big national database so we can have this big data set. And I really do think these civil servants, they're the unsung heroes here, because it's not a difficult bit of engineering to build a database. That's quite easy, right? But the actual getting everyone to get their data into the same place and feed it to the same place, that is a really difficult human and bureaucratic problem. So they've had to design a specification for how you could store a TRO in a digital way, because a lot of these are literally just the person in the council office typing up a TRO in Microsoft Word and exporting it as a PDF. So you've got to work out how to do it in a sort of machine readable way so you can actually have it stored in a database. And then the even bigger difficulty is how you persuade all of these hundreds of councils and different highway authorities and so on, like National Highways and TfL, etc., to all feed their TROs as they're published into this new system.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about like 600-700 councils, right? So this could be a bit of a nightmare. I guess that's why they've been working on it since 2018.
Yeah, it's quite funny. If you go into the depths of YouTube, you can actually find some videos about digital traffic orders and the sort of consultations with local council. I think they're basically like Zoom recordings, and you can hear, let's say, some slightly tetchy conversations between the DFT and the local councils, who are furious that they've got to do some more work. But it is getting there. And the reason I want to talk about it is because we're at the precipice of this all starting to take off now. And getting them into one place, it can be relatively straightforward. There are some common software packages. So most local councils, there's basically like case management software. It's a bit like how most GPs, though there are thousands of doctors around the country, they all use basically one of 3 software packages. So if you want to integrate something with like the NHS app, it's relatively easy to just persuade the software vendor to add a thing in to make it all talk to each other. So in the same way, I think they can get like 80% of TROs all sent up to this new DFT system just by changing one bit of software. And then it's just the sort of 20% that remain who in some cases still do stuff manually. But it is still a change. It's still a change in how you train people and how you update software. So there's still quite a lot of bureaucratic fiction there.
And so we're 7 years into this process at this point. Is the end in sight?
I'm not sure if the end is in sight, but certainly the start is well in sight now. So at the end of September, they launched a public beta of this new system. So the first local authorities are now on board and are feeding their data in, their TROs into the system. And I think it's by the first half of next year, they want to have everyone feeding in their new TROs, the newly created ones. And then the Transport Secretary as well, she's actually got the power to force councils to do this following the Autonomous Vehicles Act that passed last year within days of the election being called. Basically, she's now got the statutory instrument to press the button and say, no, now you've got to definitely do this. So fingers crossed by this time next year, the database should be filling up, and I imagine it's going to be quite satisfying, like watching a big bucket of water fill up or something like that.
Yeah, and then driving will be completely perfect and painless, apart from obviously all the slow and annoying people on the roads.
Maybe it will be, Martin, and I hope it will be. I think it will be definitely more painless, especially when this database starts getting integrated with things like Google Maps and other tools and so on. But it is still going to all take a while to happen because there's not actually a concrete plan yet for how to feed in the archives of existing TROs into the system. And this could be a big deal because these things have been around for decades, right? And there could still be TROs which have been activated, as it were, for decades and decades ago and just have like never been digitized, because if a speed limit was set as like a 60-mile-an-hour road in the 1980s or something and nothing's changed since then there's no reason to like publish a TRO or have a digital thing on a digital system. So it'll take time, but like I say, over time this database is going to become more and more useful as a source of ground truth. It's slowly going to fill up with more and more accurate information, and as we see this built into different mapping apps and used by stuff, it will just make everything work that little bit better. And I do think it's really interesting because it could go much further than just making Google Maps slightly less annoying as well. So you could have things like what they call dynamic TROs, because if everyone's using a digital system, then you could have sort of timed or temporary TROs. So you could have a system where if it gets really busy, then double yellow lines are imposed or unimposed, or parking restrictions are changed to help traffic move a lot faster. You could have curbside pickup areas, which are sort of responding to demand as well, or timed or something like that. So you could say, well, deliveries can drop off here at certain times of day, but not during certain other times, stuff like that.
I mean, the obvious example, James, would be bus lanes that are in operation certain hours of day, or certain routes that would be reserved for public transport, say during the rush hour in the morning and evening.
Absolutely. And you could even make them dynamic as well. So you could only make the bus lanes come on if traffic gets really bad, but you still want to get buses going through. And the other example I think is interesting as well is like loading bays on high streets. So if you live on a busy street, I used to live on Walworth Road in South London, this busy high street, and there's like loading bays in front of my house. And if you're a van driver trying to get stuff into a shop, you need that bay to be free. So we could build systems where you can book delivery bays by the hour or something like that. And then, of course, there's the self-driving stuff. You mentioned it a moment ago. So self-driving cars, if we want them to navigate autonomously, it's all well and good them relying on their cameras and LiDAR sensors, but if the more data they can have on board about what to expect and stuff, then that's going to make them more reliable, because they'll be able to see what's basically over the next horizon rather than just what's in front of them. So this could all feed into that and help make self-driving cars even safer as well.
Yeah, it sort of feels like one of those topics again, like the postcode address file, which I'm legally contracted to mention. But one of those cases where just joining up and data and making it available unlocks things that we probably haven't even thought of at this point, right? It's just an intrinsically, economically productive, innovative thing to do.
Absolutely. The analogy with all of these things, I always talk about it with the postcode address file as well, is that GPS was a system that was built by the American government for military stuff. They opened it up in 2000, and the amount of value it has created in terms of the new things that we can do, the new capabilities, is just immeasurable, because that's how we can track our dinner being delivered to us. So in the same way, if we have all of this data, all of these TROs in one place, and this real detailed map, I guess, of how Britain's roads work from a legal perspective, in terms of all of the fiddly little bits of British road infrastructure all in one place, then who knows what people could build with that and what new clever things might emerge. And what I love about digital TROs is that it's sort of just a nice little value add, a little incremental thing that we're not going to see on an individual level. I'm sure driving will be ever so slightly less annoying, but we probably won't notice it on an individual level. It will just be the seconds saved that you didn't realise that you saved. But you aggregate this over the entire economy, it means everyone's going to be getting to where they want to be faster. It means greater productivity. It means just more economic activity can happen. It means we can use our road system more efficiently. And it means just basically fewer fuck-ups and fewer things going wrong. So, yeah, I'm very excited that this is actually happening. This seems like such an obvious thing. And it's something that only really the government could do, because they need to be the ones to pull the levers to make all these people talk to each other and coordinate and get them in the same place. So, yeah, it's an exciting time. So we're just at the start of it now. So, yeah, maybe let's check in a few years' time and see just how slightly less annoying driving is, and maybe it'll help with growth as well. So, Martin, before we get to this week's guest, let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. We both write Substack newsletters every week. Martin, have you been writing about anything this week?
Well, I have, and it's the same story that we've just covered, the bridge to nowhere. You can see a lot more detail there, maps, pictures, diagrams, and even some video footage taken from the site, just so that you can really understand this thing up close.
It's really worth going there, looking at the pictures. The picture of the Holloway that leads to this enormous road is genuinely jaw-dropping. So we'll put links to that on abundancepod.com. And if you are enjoying the show, don't forget, tell people about the show. Massage our egos. The best thing you can do to help this show continue to exist is share it, because that makes us feel big and important when more people are listening to the show. So yeah, go to WhatsApp now, go to Apple Podcasts, give us 5 stars, get the link, then send it to all your friends, post it on social media and so on. But now, anyway, let's get to this week's guest. And yeah, it's Ben Gascoigne, who is the chair of the New Towns Inquiry on the Built Environment Select Committee in the House of Lords, which is a big mouthful. But basically, they've put out part 1 of a major new report where they've been digging into for the past few months the best way to build Britain's new towns, which should be hopefully being constructed over the next few years. So we thought, let's check in with Ben and see what his conclusions are. So I'm delighted to be joined now by our first ever returning guest on the show, Ben Gascoigne. You're back for more because you've just published the findings of the first stage of your inquiry's report into new towns. So can you give us the headlines? What are you most excited about? What do you think are the key findings that everyone should know about from your inquiry so far?
Thanks, James. And the reason I'm a return guest is because I think 2 things. One, I came on here, you very kindly asked me to come on to talk about what we wanted to do with our inquiry on new towns, which I did when we launched our inquiry, which we've now concluded. But the second thing, I do think, if I may say, these sorts of debates about growth and building are hugely important. So your podcast, which I regularly listen to, is a fantastic contributor to the wider debate about why growth is good. And, as I'm sure we both know, we don't have to agree on everything, but fundamentally, we've got to build more homes and got to build more business and everything, and infrastructure. So as you say, James, we concluded the first part of our inquiry into new towns and expandable settlements. And as you'll remember, the government, when they were elected in July last year, said that they wanted to put a series of new towns across the country. And they created a task force which looked into a number of sites. And they reported a couple of months ago, I think it was now, and they reported during the Labour Party conference and set out 12 new towns and some of the issues around those new towns. At the same time, we published our report, which didn't look into location. So we left that purely to the task force. But what we did look in is, how do you make new towns successful? What is needed? And our report, which we have published now, sets out 12 recommendations. 11, I think it is, actually, forgive me. And in those, there's a number of important things, such as how do you get community voices involved? What is the sort of governance structure? The importance of putting in infrastructure first. But the crucial one for me, and to me, it sort of runs through all of them and sits right at the top, which is about leadership. And it's about, if the government really wants to do this, and we support them in that endeavour, they've got to drive it through. It's got to be gripped day in, day out. And that, we had some fantastic evidence sessions, but we met with the government ministers, Minister Pennycook and Minister Taylor, who I regularly talk to, both of whom I respect massively and are very dedicated to their work and what they're doing on this. But you need the Treasury as ever, and you need the Treasury to step up to the plate. And frankly, our position is it needs to be driven from the very top, from the very centre. In my view, as you know, I've done a stint in Downing Street. It's Downing Street that runs the show, whether we like it or not. And ultimately, you need Downing Street to be bringing all the departments together, acting as the sort of interlocutor, but driving this agenda, not just across Whitehall and getting Treasury to step up, but getting local authorities to working with them as well. So it's a great report. We emphasise, as I say, some practical steps. It's not reams and reams. You can read it and enjoy it. I must admit, I've read it so many times that the first time I read it, when I got to the end, I was waiting. I thought I'd not printed the rest. I wanted to carry on, but we're going to carry on in our endeavour to push this agenda.
One of the interesting recommendations I thought was you want to create a body to basically oversee all of the proposed new towns and sort of set design codes and things. Do you have any sense of how that should work and what sort of things that should do? And is there a risk there that it could become a bit too prescriptive, that you could have the centre saying, oh, well, everything's got to be 6 stories high, or something in a way that makes certain developments slightly too difficult, maybe?
That is a risk. I think what we would say to that is we wouldn't want to be going down too prescriptive a risk, because fundamentally there's obviously also local considerations to take into place. Many of these new towns are expanded settlements rather than new towns from a blank piece of paper or a blank field. So you've got a lot of considerations to take to remember when it's an expansion to an already built up area. But we visited Denmark, where there is a sort of national, through their Ministry of Culture, I think it is, from memory, that sort of set out sort of general, I'd say it's light touch, but it's sort of general approach to what they would like to see in development. So I think it can be done, and it can be done in a light touch way. But fundamentally, again, this is what our general argument is, that you need leadership from the top, but that there needs to be some sort of vision to this. What is it that these new towns will look like, feel, and how do they widely contribute to the economy?
I think you mentioned in the report that you want it to be more than about just sort of hitting the housing targets and sort of getting the numbers up in terms of the number of houses. So what sort of things do you think these new towns can do? What sort of roles do you think that they can play beyond just literally making the new housing starts graph go upwards?
Yeah, which, and building housing in itself, we're not criticising building housing in itself. When we embarked on this endeavour, the government wasn't actually clear in itself as to what it wanted to do. And so sometimes you'd hear about growth, sometimes you'd hear about housing. And I think our concerns as we embarked on this journey and as the task force was undertaking their work, we weren't quite clear what the mission was. It was sort of, we're just building new towns and a task force is looking into it. Now that the task force has published their report, they set out the new towns and exactly what each of them is there to do. Particularly also, to be fair, through a lens of the industrial strategy, which they've taken consideration of. So I think for us, it was more, if you want to go down this journey, it requires a lot of effort, energy, time, and money. But you've got to be very clear as to what the sort of broader picture is. So I think there is something about housing, but it's a broader piece that the government needs to articulate. Also, James, they've announced these 12 sites. It may very well be, and it's not for me to comment on the locations, but it may very well be that during the course of their deliberations that actually some of these sites don't work for whatever reason. And I think that's why more fundamentally you need to sort of set a general case as to why these new towns as a whole is an important part of our, it's not just house building, but an important part of our economic story.
And one of the things that you talk about in the report, and you come out really strongly for this, is the role of development corporations to sort of oversee the creation of new towns. So each new town would have, I guess, its own development corporation. I think you say development corporations should be used in all but exceptional cases. This is really strong and actually goes further than the Sir Michael Lyon's New Towns Task Force report, where I think it says they want development corporations, but they talk about other delivery models as well. So why is it that you've landed on the development corporations as the crucial thing for making all this happen?
I think it's because actually, if you look at some successful delivery models that have taken place, a lot of them have been through that type. There's a crucial point, though, in this, which is whilst development corporations are very good at really driving, from our perspective, we want this mission to not only succeed, but to start and be taken through not just delivery, but seeing it through into the next stage and having some sort of body that oversees from start to finish. Development corporations are a key part because they can bring all the voices together. You can utilize government. So you've got the delivery model in itself, but you must also have local voices in this process as well. So I think it's ensuring that they're delivered on the ground, but making sure there are local local voices as well as national voices in that room as well. But the emphasis we want to get to here, and this is why we prefer development corporations, is it's the sort of speed and effective delivery of these new towns.
So it's interesting that you talk about community engagement there, because I'll be honest, the one thing that scared me a little bit reading your report, and this is because I'm a radicalized YIMBY ultra here, right? I just want to concrete over everything and get some towers up, get some skyscrapers up as in many places as possible. But you talk about community involvement, and a lot of the time, especially on our podcast, we talk about how it's often, quote unquote, sort of community things which are used as an excuse to not do things. That's always the blocker. And I slightly worry that by talking about, the need for engaging the community throughout, and people say things like bringing them along with us, can we actually do that? Is there not a case for when you're trying to build something new and do something bold, like build an entire new town, the government should be unafraid to sort of pick a fight or make a decisive decision and say the new town is going to go here, those people might be upset, but ultimately it's for the greater good of the country that we have this new town exist, and therefore there is no way to bring everyone with us all of the time, if you see what I mean.
No, and in our inquiry, we had some evidence sent through, which in effect said that broadly, when it comes to polling on new towns, I think about a third of the population are in support, a third of the population are opposed, and there's sort of an unsure middle third. And I think from our perspective, what we would argue is that bank your third that you've got, which is great, but do what you can to engage with that third. Now, you can debate how you get community voices involved, and you can debate the success of that venture. For us, we think it's very important that it's not just ensuring that it's about the delivery aspect, but it's also about the design. So it's about ensuring you understand what is needed from a local community. The other point, I mean, I asked when Minister Pennicuick came in, I asked him this specific question, that there will be, and we've seen that happen already, which is what we thought would happen. The moment you meant, everyone is, and Public First did some research on this as well, which says that most people are supportive of development generally, but they want to see the uplift, they want to see the benefits, and that's their biggest concern, which is very, very valid, and I think it's absolutely right. But when the locations were announced, you saw that there's been some local voices expressed in opposition to one site in particular. And from our perspective, we think that's legitimate, but equally we think that's where you should engage from the very beginning. You're not going to take everyone on this journey, but you should all seek to do whatever you can to do that. And I asked the minister this exact question, which is, there will be voices against you. There'll be political pressure fundamentally, because a lot of this, and again, this comes back to why it needs to be someone very senior to drive it, because there will be opponents, and there'll be, as I said, there may be some opponents regardless of location, just people just don't believe it, that they're right. But he did say, and I don't want to misquote him, so I don't want to quote him directly, but he did say, look, this isn't the national interest. I think people do accept that, but I think for us, what we want to ensure, like I say, it's not just in the delivery element, but in the design as well, that you get those views, you garner those views, and you ensure that they're sort of in the design of the new towns as well. But you're not going to look. You're right. You're fundamentally right. Which you're not going to. You're not going to be able to take everyone on this journey. Not everyone will be happy, and even those that you do involve may not. We're in a democracy. Not everyone gets their way all the time. And the definition of success, does it mean that you're 100% successful in 100% of things? Arguably that isn't possible. It isn't possible. But different people will be happy, different people won't. And particularly when we're looking at expanded settlements, there'll be a lot more communities affected, and I mean affected both negatively and positively, through this program.
The other big thing I think we haven't mentioned yet is funding, and you've got a whole section on how we should pay for new towns. So can you give us a sort of sketch out how are we going to pay for this? Because obviously the one thing everyone knows about politics and government at the moment is there's no money. Totally. Underscoring basically every political battle is there's not enough money for anything. And presumably if we're starting these new towns and like you call for an infrastructure first way of building things, so the people move into these new towns and they presumably have running water and the doctor's surgery nearby. But that's going to cost public money up front, isn't it? So how do you think we can finance these new towns in a way that sort of is sustainable?
It's a good point. And we do, I mean, there's a few points to make. We do talk about the funding, and there's different funding models that have worked and can work. And we looked at examples internationally as well as here at home. Obviously, when you're talking about a new town, you can look at things like land capture and land value capture. So there's different ways you can do it. But crucially, the thing on money is actually, and again, we saw examples of this internationally, which is you don't, just because, you're right. And I think that there was a report which was put out, which said that each new town would cost about £4 billion, which we note in our report, which obviously, and we're in a different world than where we were post-war. Things are very different. But equally, it's also not just about the public finances being put into these schemes. It's also being there to give investor confidence that the government supports this and is prepared ultimately to underwrite and say to the private sector and investors that this is something the government supports and therefore invest in it. Now, again, using international example, but that has happened when other countries have built new towns. And the infrastructure first point is right, because not just on new towns, but many developments, you need to put the infrastructure in first and then other things follow. But again, it demonstrates a level of commitment from the top that it is something that we support, and we hope others will come to the table.
I don't know if you're familiar with the example. It's not quite a new town, but it's a new-ish area of town in Cambridge that was planned. And it involved moving the town's sewage works to further out of town. And then the site where that was, you could build sort of like 8,000 new homes. And this was a plan that was worked up by, I think it was Cambridge Council. And then it involved the Treasury putting in 270 million quid of funding from one of the various housing pots. And then it was pulled in August all of a sudden because the value for money calculation changed. And it's basically the knock-on effect is all of this work has turned out to nothing and they can't build this bit of a new town. So is there a way we can sort of design in a way to avoid a situation like that? Because you can imagine a situation where, the plans for a new town go forward, everything starts coming together, you get private developers on board, someone's there drawing the street grid and you've got some nice architectural renders of what it's going to look like. And then the government say, we'll put some cash into it or something like that as a sort of part of the seed or as part of the way of getting this thing kickstarted. And then suddenly things can just fall apart all of a sudden. Is there any way we can sort of get around the politics of it all or get around that? Is it possible to design that out, or is that just an inherent part of politics?
I don't know the scheme direct, but I think I have great predictions that my third time lucky when I'm back on, you and I are going to be looking at the sewage works. I couldn't think of anything better. We're going to go. But I think, can you avoid all circumstances like that? No, because there's also international events which can affect lots of things. Economic shocks. You can't prevent everything. But I think if you, and again, going back to our report, what we argue for, and I think it is the main one, is this sort of national leadership piece, which is if you've got the government saying day in, day out, and you've got a very senior figure that is able to grapple the Treasury and other government departments and local planning authorities and saying, right, we are going to do this, and this is how we're going to do it. And if there's an issue, I've got James that's got a problem. James, let me speak to him. I'll fix it. You want to do this, I'll do that. Whatever it may be, but that owns it and is responsible and is driving it, then I think you mitigate many of the risks, and you also speed the process up so that you're not reliant upon so-and-so to talk to someone or this to speak to someone. But it has to be very, very senior and able, like I say, to grapple that monolith known as the Treasury.
And very finally, so this was part one of the report that's now been published, and you're looking ahead to part two. What can we look forward to in part two of the inquiry? What are you going to be investigating?
So we've made it very clear from the very beginning that this entire program is not just the sort of the theory behind new towns; it's also the actual delivery and how what is a successful new town and what are the issues on the ground. And so we are now, having completed the first part of our report, we're moving very swiftly on to the second part, which is about community building. What is it that isn't required on these actual new towns? So we've looked at the funding, the governance, and the sort of politics. and the legal structures. We're now moving, on the ground. It's you and me down by the sewerage plant, looking in and figuring out exactly what is it that's required in these areas. When we talk about infrastructure, what type of infrastructure? We think about roads and sewers, and yes, that is infrastructure, but it's also shops. It's also some sort of health provision. So it's those sorts of things, as well as parks and playgrounds and schools and all the other stuff. So what is it that is now going to make them successful on the ground? So that's our next bit. We've got a call for evidence, which will be coming out very soon. And I really implore everyone that is interested and wants to play a part to get involved.
Fantastic. And we'll put links to the report so everyone can go and have a read on abundancepod.com. And yeah, if anyone wants to get involved, then we'll put links there as well. But for now, Ben Gascoigne, thank you very much. And Martin, that's just about it for another show. How do you think it's gone? What an astonishing story you've given us today. What a treat.
Yeah, I think this one's going to set the Substack going viral this week. It's fair to say. So yeah, I hope people enjoyed it. Make sure you check in on the Substack as well. There's some really nice photography, some video footage that I went all the way there to take for your own viewing pleasure. And as we say every week, make sure that you like and subscribe, because if you don't subscribe, you might find yourself on your very own bridge to nowhere.
Frankly, Martin, if this doesn't go viral, I will be very disappointed in the general public. You're probably going to have to resort to TikTok dances if this sort of quality content does not go viral. But yeah, for now, abundancepod.com, subscribe to our Substacks, tune in next week. Goodbye for now.
See you next week.